I'm Dr. Bruce Beck. Dr. Skedras asked me to moderate this session. I have the honor to be on the faculty at Holy Cross and Hellenic College as a New Testament professor, and want to also welcome all of you to our campus and also to this conference. I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Father Nicholas Apostola, who is going to be offering a paper from SCOBA to the Assembly. And we're going to, after that, we will hear a paper from Mr. Nick Anton. I still think a recent graduate of our school, but Nick has been, what year did you graduate?
11 years ago.
Very recent, as I said, and we're glad to welcome you back. Who will be presenting a paper, The Journey of Orthodox Christian Unity from SCOBA to the Assembly of Bishops. Since the papers are on similar topics, although they will not be the same, we'll hold our questions until after both papers have been presented, and there should be plenty of time for discussion. Father Nick.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beck. I'll dispense with the usual greetings to this one and that one. Just by a way, for many of you know who I am, but some of you I'm sure don't, and how I got involved in all of this. When I was still a student here, I was also the secretary of our Archdiocese and doing a lot of the ecumenical and inter-Orthodox work. And SCOBA was just beginning to be revived again in the sort of mid to late 70s. And His Eminence Archbishop Victorine sent me to be the Archdiocese representative on the Study and Planning Commission, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the talk, which was like the second tier, if you want, what is now the Secretariat in the Assembly, in which I met monthly. And really kind of prepared things, was getting in all of the correspondence directed to the bishops, the SCOBA bishops, preparing an agenda and lining things up and putting order into what had been the initiative of SCOBA, that SCOBA started in the early 60s. So I came into the second phase of SCOBA, as I'll mention in terms of the phases. But at that point, there was a new energy and a kind of real hope that the project of Orthodox unity was realizable. As we know, we're not quite there yet. I was going to end with this, but let me start with it, so you get a sense of my temperament around this. I was talking to one of my brothers, my fellow clergy in Worcester, and he mentioned that he saw my name on the program, and I said, it's TBA. I went, yeah, okay, there. And he said, I picked up the other night, I was having a hard time sleeping, and I don't even remember how he said he had found it, but something that Archbishop Iakovos had written in 1960-something, late 60s, about the future of Orthodoxy in America and the American church. And he said, I finished it. He said, it was amazing. I cried. And I looked at him, I smiled, and I said, I cry almost all the time, but for very different reasons. Okay. Let me give a little bit of an historical background, and I'm sure you've had this over the past 2 days. It's really important to go back to the latter part of the 19th century and early part of the 20th century. We can't, I think, appreciate, or maybe we can a little bit more, because our period, the epoch that we're living in now is so divisive, is so torn apart, and there were wars everywhere, and things are going back and forth. That was the world that the immigration was coming out of into America. So people were coming here not for, certainly for economic reasons and all of that, but like you see the refugees from Syria, now the refugees from Ukraine, the refugees from Southeast Asia. I was, kid, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9, maybe, and I asked my grandmother, we're Romanians from Albania. I said, why did you come here? And she said, well, matter of fact kind of way. The Turks were burning our village, and so it was a good time to leave. And so they came traumatized, generally speaking, came here as refugees, not in a neutral way, not because you got a scholarship or not because, you got a better job, you got a job offer or whatever else. They came here to save themselves and their lives and set up this. So the immigrant communities came in, and there was a lot of discussion about the fact that there was Andrew was talking about it a lot, the empowerment that the immigrant population felt in America in setting up immigrant communities. The reality is, and it's not, I was also struck as I was listening, there was a kind of very narrow focus on the Greek-American experience, and I'm screaming in my head, this was everybody's experience. This was really all of we can sort of limit it to, for our purposes, the Orthodox immigrant experience coming from Eastern Europe and the Balkans and the Middle East. But that was pretty much everyone's experiences. They came depending on the place, for different reasons. So you had the communists after the First World War, the Communist Revolution. Lots of Russians had to emigrate, and they emigrated to Western Europe and then to the United States. But lots of Greeks had to leave Russia. My wife's family was from Pontus and Crimea. And as she tells me, her grandfather was a major shipping tycoon or whatever on the Black Sea, 6 or 7 or whatever ships in his fleet. And the revolution came, and whoever said, are you Greek or are you Russian? And he said, I'm Greek. And they said, good, there's the door. And then they went to Greece. My father-in-law's family were from the other side of the Black Sea. And similarly, they had to choose, and they left. So there was huge population transfers. The Armenian genocide happens as the Ottoman Empire is collapsing. There's the chaos in all of the Balkans with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. My Ottoman experience in Albania is that Albania was still the only part of the Ottoman Empire left in the Balkans by the end of the First World War, and the Civil War began. And so the Turks were burning her village in that way. So people came and they set up communities. And initially there were clubs and whatever else, mostly young men looking for jobs, a very fluid kind of situation. They eventually decided to establish some sort of church. They would find a priest somewhere, maybe right home. There was a priest who wanted to come, and he came, and began to organize communities in that fashion. So, but it was totally, if you will, anomic, acanonical, if we want to talk about it like that. And it was very hard to know who was in canonical good order and who wasn't. There weren't very many bishops. More bishops came, but even they were almost as bad as the, if you will, vagabond, it's a technical term, vagabond priests who would be showing up. The closest we got to that kind of experience was when the communist regimes fell in Eastern Europe, and we had a huge influx here, in Western Europe as well, certainly, but here, of priests who were showing up with dubious sort of canonical kind of provenance, and trying to figure out who was legitimate, who wasn't legitimate. Communities were popping up. I'm the vicar of the Archdiocese, and I was sent to, I don't remember your name here, putting order in these new communities more than on one occasion, and I'm talking in the 1990s now. I would be at a general assembly in some parish with 200 or 300 or 400 Romanians ready to kill me. Ready to kill me. So things were chaotic. And little by little, there was some order created. The other thing that I just sort of throw in is that I understand that this is a symposium on the 100th anniversary of the Greek Archdiocese, but there's kind of little attention being paid to the fact that at least the Russians were here 150 years earlier. And their presence was more pronounced in the West than in the East, but nonetheless, so there was a presence here of Orthodoxy that predated the immigration from the period of the first, I'm just going to do a lot of, I don't want to get too specific because it'll take all day as we look here in terms of footnoting everything. But the period around the First World War up until the beginning of the interwar period. So there was a presence of Orthodoxy here, and during that period, then in the 20s, maybe teens, but the war had to end first. There was an attempt to begin to create order. So the Greek Archdiocese was formed. There was a whole sort of stream of archbishops that came in and out until Athenagoras was sent to really put order to the place. But that was true. I can say the same thing for the Romanians. The Romanian diocese here, episcopate, was founded in the late 20s, made pleas to the Patriarchate to send somebody. They finally, under duress in some way, sends a bishop. He's like at a loss as to how to organize the communities and create some sort of order and liturgical order in all of this. Yeah, there was tension between laity and clergy, perhaps, but a lot of tension between clergy and now the new bishop, who the last thing that they wanted now was some authority over them, to be accountable. There's the issue of accountability as well. Be accountable for all of this. And that cleaning up process took 20 or 30 years. One of the first things, as I've been told, and I think it's in the record, that Athenagoras did when he got here was really to get rid of all of the bishops. And then, one by one, bring in the help. So you had the entire centralization of authority within the Greek Archdiocese in the person of the Archbishop, and up until the revisions and the creation of dioceses, in the end, everybody was an auxiliary bishop, an auxiliary to the Archbishop. And in this way, create order. And again, what I'm told, not my field, I didn't do the research on this, but that Athenagoras, till the day he died, said, you can't have other bishops in America, it will create chaos. Part of this as well, we heard of the intervention of the Greek Foreign Ministry at the 1970 Congress, were the interventions of the governments. Initially, the early correspondence between the churches here and the mother churches there was an assumption, this was a kind of great revelation, was that the assumption that the church in America would be an English-speaking church. That was the assumption, kind of across the board. Everyone was quickly disabused of that idea. It took about 5 years, 6 years, or whatever else. And then there was this sense that we need a presence in America. And that lasted, transcended the communist period, transcended all of these other sorts of things, to keep a presence, a foothold in America. Because if you wanted to send a delegation, if you wanted connections, even among lay people, connected lay people of the various, whichever ethnicity you want, that was very advantageous for the mother country. And so there was that pressure as well to keep the church, if you will, ethnic in that way, to support that, to do all of that. At the same time, generally speaking, the bishops and the clergy were also interested in preaching the gospel and really making the people that they found here faithful. I mean, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the people who were emigrating were not the top intellectuals. Most of them, many of them in any event, didn't know how to read and write. That what they knew of the faith was what was piously passed down. And that shouldn't be discounted. I was fasting very vigorously as a teenager, as teenagers are wont to do, to sort of take on something and kind of go to it. But of course, I was a teenager and I was hungry. And being hungry, I became pretty vile, temper, screaming, yelling, whatever else. Yes, exactly. And I lived in a 3-tenement, and my parents owned, and the woman on the 3rd floor was like a grandmother to me. She looked at me, and she said, "All of your fasting is nothing for what comes out of your mouth." Well, she couldn't read or write. But she had captured, and I joked it one time. I said, everything I learned about canon law, I learned from her. Dr. Patsawas was not too happy. But as I studied canon law, and I'm listening to what she was saying, she understood what the rules were, what they, not only what they were, what they meant. And so it's, I think, a little dangerous to discount, in the setting up of the church here, that experience. And then you got the Second World War, which was another devastation, and really cut off, well, for Russia, that communication, that line had really been broken with the Communist Revolution, and more especially when Stalin took over. Dzerzhinsky had, who ran the Checker, had successfully, as the documents show these days, had successfully infiltrated the entire white Russian communities in both Western Europe and in the United States, New York, and wherever else. So he was pretty much controlling that. Stalin didn't trust Dzerzhinsky and made him dismantle all of that. But that line was broken, except for the emigre communities and both in Paris, Karlovitz, then Paris, and then Jordanville, and the church outside of Russia, here in the States. But then with the Second World War and the occupation of Eastern Europe by the Soviets and the imposition of communist governments, communication, general communication, was broken at least from the late 40s through the 1960s. Some places it was better, others worse. Albania was the Russians and the Chinese had decided that they were going to make Albania an experiment for creating an atheistic country. And so every religion was persecuted to the ultimate, destroyed. Romania was a different story. That the Romanians were survivors in that way, living kind of where they are positioned. And they learned how to just get along. And when you can tell in this way that when the communists finally fell, Russia was doing adult baptisms, like by the tens of thousands, and throughout Eastern Europe, they went to look for people in Romania to baptize. Everyone had been baptized. including high party officials. Ceausescu buried his father in the church, and it was broadcast on Romanian television. At the same time, people were imprisoned. It was very hard. You had to know how to manipulate and move. So when all of that was a great disruption between the communities here and the mother churches and that back and forth, the Greeks were freer. There was the comment about, I think you made that sort of, the Greeks have been persecuted, sure, by the KKK early on, but generally speaking, America treasured Athenian democracy. That's what I learned in grammar school. Isn't that what you learned? That the whole thing was based on Aristotle and Plato and Demosthenes. I could go down the list. Greek mathematics and whatever else. So if you're growing up in America, you have a fairly favorable impression, and besides, the food was really good. So there was a lot more space for the Greeks to operate in this way. But, for example, the Russians, not so much. And there was a lot of money. I mean, I don't know how many. Sikorsky, guy went to, at least whatever, the helicopter. And the great, if you go to New York on Route 15 on the Merritt, you'll see the Sikorsky, White Russian, funded the OCA and the other, what you call it, Jordanville crowd. There were a lot of rich Russians, Slavs in America, but very hidden. They weren't upfront with it at all. So there was a deep presence in America of the church. There had also been attempts. It was a period of remarkable figures. Athenagoras was a remarkable figure. Anthony Bashir was a remarkable figure. We could go, how much? 10 minutes left? Oh, it's not going to be enough time. Iakovos was a remarkable figure. Yeah, he was a great communicator. Yeah, he was all of that. Just to be in his presence was amazing. One story. I think it was his 25th anniversary of being ordained as bishop. And there was a banquet in Worcester, and Tsongas. Tsongas was,
He was a senator.
yeah, senator, yeah. No, but it was, okay. And he was there and introducing, and he said, and they didn't get along, he and Iakovos. But if you want to talk about Cyprus, he said, we were organizing all of the Greeks in government to move the U.S. government on the Cyprus question. And there was a meeting organized in D.C. And so you had this room full of every named Greek in the U.S. government. And the Archbishop showed up. And he says, there was no doubt as to who was in charge. So you're dealing with a remarkable personality who had a great deal of insight and direction. He set SCOBA up, while there had been precedents before that. He set SCOBA up in 61, and convened, if you go through the list of who was there at the first meeting and stuff like that, it's remarkable. People who aren't speaking to one another now, people who are now baptizing people that I would baptize, rebaptize people. So that's the kind of the division that had happened, but nonetheless brought everyone together into the same room and began to plot a plan to organize the church as it is and a plan for the future. Some commissions had already been set up. If you talk to the Boy Scouts, talk about America, the first commission of SCOBA was the Scouting Commission. They're very proud of it. I don't know what's happened to scouting since, but nonetheless, there it is. Yeah, exactly. The youth movements, nationally and internationally, many of the great church leaders of the second half of the of the 20th century and into our own time were products of the youth movements here and there, and there was a back and forth. The OCEC, the setting up a kind of coherent religious ed program, cross-jurisdictionally in that way. Every diocese had their own department, but it was a real way to cooperate in that way. That all began then, and there were more. I won't go through the whole list. But at the same time, because you can't discount the zeitgeist, perhaps because of the war, perhaps because of the bomb, perhaps because of the communist threat, there's all of that that's happening. People felt a need to create institutions, systems, relationships that would get us out of the cycle. And so you had the formation, again, there were precursors of the World Council of Churches in the late 40s. You had other kinds of cooperation going on in the American scene, not only the World Council of Churches, but the National Council of Churches, there was that. Then John the 23rd decides to convene the Second Vatican Council, a monumental event. Changed everything. And within Orthodoxy, there had been a kind of discussion, desire, whatever, to call a great council. And in preparation for that, there were, I think, 3 Rhodes conferences called, one after another, to develop an agenda, and without giving you all of the, boring you with all the details, but to develop an agenda and to plot towards a great council. The date for that was viewed as 1970 or so, around that time. Within SCOBA, the idea was, because it was they never considered themselves as being the permanent solution, but rather it was provisional, it was transitory. But the idea was it was put forward, something that looks not unlike what we have now in the Assembly. How much? 5 minutes, yeah, okay, I'll zip right through. A provisional synod, and a plan was made for the hierarchs of SCOBA, there were about 8 of them, to go and visit each of the mother churches in preparation for the Great Council to present the case from America by the American bishops for what was needed in America. That was nixed by the mother churches. There was also a felt need to resolve the question of the metropolia, the Russian Orthodox, Greek Catholic, whatever, the OCA. And within the OCA, there was a great kind of desire to sort of seek refuge under the ecumenical patriarchate. There was no question about the canonical status, because at the time of the revolution, there were more than 3 bishops here within the metropolia. So that was a given. But at the same time, where did they plant their flag? They went to Constantinople, and Constantinople said, as I've been reported to me, was, go to your mother. They did. And Moscow threw a curved ball. And as we heard this morning, one of the great traumatic events was the establishment, whatever, we can talk about that in another forum, but one of the great traumatic events was the autocephaly of the OCA. And that put SCOBA into dormition, a kind of catatonia for about 10 years. Didn't meet. Met maybe here or there, but nothing. And as I said, I came in just as SCOBA was being sort of revived. The direction there, things had changed, and changed dramatically. A lot more pan-Orthodox associations had been created. There was a felt need to rewrite the statutes of SCOBA. The idea would be SCOBA itself would be like an executive committee, a permanent synod, or if you want to call it that, with an assembly of bishops, and that sort of thing. And it was moving forward At the same time, the Patriarchate, well, the mother churches, were organizing, and as a follow-up to the Rhodes meetings, various conferences at Chambézy, mostly dealing with the question of the diaspora. And they went back and forth and back and forth. And by the late 90s, there was a formulation. And everyone was excited. SCOBA planned an Assembly of Bishops to meet at Ligonier in 93. It was a remarkable meeting. It was, I would say, a charismatic event. And if you want yin and yang here, an antidote to what happened with the OCA autocephaly. People came together and really talked about an American church, the bishops. Everyone was gathered. And when word got out, it was immediately squashed, and Iakovos was resigning within months after that. And that was 1 minute. I'm going to have 2. Is that 2 minutes? Thank you. And so there was a general sense of relief, while the Ecumenical Patriarchate was the one who took the hit for kind of putting the damper on this. Again, from the sources, most of the mother churches breathed a sigh of relief. But the effect it had on America, again, was to delay everything. Iakovos was out, Spiridon was in, and Archbishop Spiridon began systematically dismantling almost everything that had been accomplished in terms of Orthodox cooperation. Plans were in place to dismantle missions, OCEC, this, that, just go down the list until, and I would say here, in terms of lay participation, a pivotal moment for me was I'm driving back from a SCOBA meeting, and I'm going up the FDR Drive, and I see on a lamppost a bumper sticker that says, in Greek, Anaxios. And I went, wow. And that's what happened. With all of the discussion this morning, I leaned over and said to someone, where's Spiridon now? That was not a traumatic event. That was a remarkable event. There was nothing like that that's happened since Florence, where the people and the clergy rose up and said, basta. Okay. From that, we have Archbishop Demetrius and a series of, and SCOBA moves ahead and prepares for, the Patriarch calls the heads of the churches. They decide to revive the Chambézy thing, try out the establishment of Assemblies of Bishops, and see how it goes. And so, in a series of 3 or 4 meetings of bishops, that was done. Let me just say this. The negatives and positives. There are a lot of positives to the Assembly. It's got better funding. It has a staff. Those things that were all sort of put forward, it identified the important issues that needed to be addressed. And it was better organized to oversee and really all of the various commissions and agencies that are under the auspices of SCOBA. But the unresolved issues remain the same, and it's the canonical issue. My Archbishop is the chair of the canonical planning. Is it canonical planning? I never get the name right. I called it the Gerrymandering Commission, in which it was to draw up the proposed diocese and how to get there, how to move there. The committee developed at least 3 plans, 4 plans, one more pathetic than the other. There were solid plans, the first 2, and it got more and more pathetic. There was no consensus among the bishops on this at all. I said to the first thing, and I had heard my poor Archbishop had gotten beaten up at the meeting when he presented at the first meeting. And people would call me and say, well, what does he think? What does he say? I said, we haven't talked about it. The meeting was in September. I was in Chicago for a council meeting, and we had supper together. And so he says to me, what happened? Because I told him what was going to happen. And I said, no one was listening. I've been listening. They don't agree. They don't want this. And these are the voices you need to listen to. Even though they're off the wall, they are accurately reflecting what is the majority opinion among the hierarchs. So we're in a kind of very terrible place. God gives us charismatic movements. That first period of SCOBA was a charismatic moment. There was an incredible optimism. And the OCA autocephaly, for good reasons, came done. The lead up to Ligonier, that 10-year period or so, were the Chambézy meetings. Who was chairing the Chambézy meetings? Metropolitan, now Patriarch Bartholomew. We thought, we're golden. This is it. Ligonier happens. Okay. And we get Spirit on. Demetrius comes in and restabilizes things. And we'll see where we go from here. But what do we do in the meantime? We be very careful and make sure we nurture the kinds of institutions that that we want to see happen. We were drafting a statement on unity, and I'll end with this. Drafting a statement on unity. And it was kind of like the discussions that have been happening here, kind of very pragmatic, practical, do this, these are forces and whatever else. And someone said, you know, you got it wrong. We don't create the unity. Unity is a gift from God. You have to be worthy of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. First, allow me to thank Dr. Skedros and Father Vrame for inviting me to come here, and thank you all for the conversations we've already had. They've been really fruitful. I know you will all be shocked to learn that we are currently in the middle of another inter-Orthodox clash. Your minds may immediately turn to Putin, who sent Orthodox Christians to invade and kill Orthodox Christians, or perhaps you are thinking about the excommunication of the Ecumenical Patriarchate or the establishment of parishes in the autocephalous Patriarchate of Alexandria by the Moscow Patriarchate. Slow down. Yes, these are all indeed inter-Orthodox clashes in our day. But I want to focus on a much older, ongoing inter-Orthodox entanglement right here in our own country, in our own backyard, in what some call the diaspora. For those who are unaware, the word diaspora is defined as, quote, the dispersion of any people from their original homeland, end quote. For the purposes of our discussion, the so-called diaspora refers to the various Orthodox Christian communities of differing ethnic backgrounds who emigrated to the United States of America over the past 3 or 4 centuries. In other words, our people here during a given time. As you might imagine, the various autocephalous churches established dioceses and archdioceses in this new land, while retaining their association to their mother churches and ethnic heritage. In that time and context, this was vital to their survival and success. However, as the church in the United States and its citizens matured over time, leading to the development of the episcopacy, and as individuals within parishes began to focus increasingly on their ethnic identity rather than their spiritual roots, a number of canonical anomalies began to bear a heavy burden on the unity of the Church. Different sacramental practices, including how to handle baptism or rebaptism, mixed marriages, reception of converts, divorce, and so on, led to confusion among the faithful and, more importantly, a disjointed witness in society. Ethnophilitism, declared a heresy in the late 19th century, mind you, separated, and in some cases continues to separate, to this very day, Orthodox Christian from Orthodox Christian. At times, bishops were and are even given the same title, sparking further conflicts and excommunications between brothers. Indeed, while the Orthodox Christian community is hardly comprised of diasporic peoples today, ecclesiastical disorganization and disjointedness remains the unfortunate reality. In an effort to bring peace and understanding among the various so-called jurisdictions, Archbishop Iakovos of blessed memory created what was called the Standing Conference of Canonical Orthodox Bishops in the Americas, or SCOBA, in 1960. SCOBA convened the heads of the various jurisdictions and brought about closer cooperation between them. Moreover, in the 1990s, at the initiative of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and more specifically, Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, the heads of the autocephalous churches, or mother churches, throughout the world began meeting together. As a result, in 2009, they created regional assemblies of bishops throughout the world, and in 2010, the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishops of North and Central America officially replaced SCOBA. 4 years later, the mother churches decided to separate the region, and thus our local assembly continued as the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishops of the United States of America. The Assembly of Bishops is the principal avenue for Orthodox Christian unity, with the express purpose of preserving and contributing to the unity of the Orthodox Church in the United States of America by furthering her spiritual, theological, ecclesiological, canonical, educational, missionary, and philanthropic objectives. To achieve this, the Assembly of Bishops works in two main fields. One, canonical regional planning, toward the planning and mapping of a unified Orthodox Church, and two, collaborative pastoral and ministerial efforts. With the prospect of a Holy and Great Council in 2016, the Assembly of Bishops focused its efforts first on the canonical regional planning. They thought at that time that the plan they devised would be reviewed and accepted by the Council. Subsequently, they would achieve a single, administratively unified church in the USA. Once unified, they would quite literally have all the time in the world to develop specific ministries. Unfortunately, in the final meeting leading up to the Holy and Great Council, and this is January of 2016, the mother churches decided they would not include decisions on the so-called diaspora in the agenda of the upcoming council. Later that year, in a last-minute decision, 4 of the autocephalous churches unfortunately decided not to participate at all in the council. These regrettable events reverberated all the way down to the Assemblies of Bishops. Since there would be no decisions on the diaspora, the efforts around canonical regional planning could not be realized. Furthermore, the assembly, comprising bishops under jurisdictions, some of whom recognize and others of whom which do not recognize the Holy and Great Council, found itself lost in no man's land. And in fact, most of the assemblies in the world just stopped meeting. But over the following years, the Assembly of Bishops decided to surge forward, regardless of international conflicts amongst other churches, and focus on various important pastoral and ministry programs right here at home, within the confines of their own canonical jurisdictions. Now, at this point, I realized I have likely fatigued you, as I much have myself, with all the destructive disagreements and divisions. So please bear with me just a few more moments as I feature a selection of Assembly of Bishops initiatives developed over the past 2 years, which we can discuss further during our conversations. Responding quickly to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Assembly of Bishops created a COVID-19 resource center, guidelines for pastoral care during that period, a parish reopening toolkit, and digital engagement opportunities for parishes, just to name a few. And the executive committee met every week during that period because nobody knew what to do. And the executive committee is much like SCOBA, it's the heads of all the jurisdictions. The Assembly established a mental health task force, which created a directory of Orthodox Christian mental health professionals, conducted a needs assessment survey, and developed Peace of Mind. Peace of Mind is a training program for clergy and parish leadership on how to recognize individuals struggling with mental health concerns and assist them in getting the help they need. All of these achievements now comprise the Assembly of Bishops' mental health ministries. The Assembly of Bishops restructured its engagement with its affiliates and agencies by creating an annual review for accountability, an application process for national Orthodox Christian organizations seeking affiliation, and regular meetings of agency leadership for better cooperation. Furthermore, the Assembly created 2 new agencies, Orthodox Volunteer Corps and Orthodox Youth Ministries, in October of 2021. The Assembly developed a mobile app in order to obtain reliable data on the needs of the faithful, much like we did for the mental health work. How can the hierarchs develop ministry if they don't know what their flock needs? The app, on a technical level, keeps the user profile completely separate from the survey responses. Thus, the information remains anonymous no matter how hard one tries and prevents any sense of retaliation for answering accurately and honestly. If you haven't already, I encourage you to download the app through the Google Play and Apple App Stores. The Assembly is in the process of forming an institutional chaplaincy program. Men and women who graduate with their MDiv cannot or sometimes do not want to enter ordained ministry. That does not mean they are not properly trained for pastoral work. Throughout the country, we have Orthodox Christian chaplains in hospitals, police and fire departments, prisons, etc. The Assembly will be a central place for the endorsement of Orthodox Christian chaplains in said institutions. In the long term, the Assembly plans to create programs, both inward and outward facing, in the area of institutional chaplaincy. Just this past year, through the oversight of its Canonical Regional Planning and Clergy Matters Committee, the Assembly has launched a pilot program of interparish associations comprised of clergy and laity of the various churches in a particular local area. The Atlanta Interparish Association is the first viable example of these efforts. In the first half of 2023, the learning from the pilot regions will be expected to set a codification of the process for creating an interparish association, and thus additional associations will be able to form easily throughout the country. The Orthodox Catholic Dialogue, later this month in just a few weeks, is going through a restructuring in order to revamp it, revive it, and ensure its success going forward. And finally, I will simply mention that the Liturgy Committee is working on a common translation of the Creed. Now, don't expect that anytime soon. They're working very slowly, and it's a very difficult task. The Pastoral Matters Committee is working on a common understanding around reception of converts, with Father Patrick Viscuso actually chaired the committee that was working on that. And so many other committees have continued their vital work in their specific niches. Now, since the Assembly is primarily about dialogue, I will not further continue my monologue. But it is vital to underline, going back to my original point, that these programs and efforts are all working towards something greater. They're all being done together, cross-jurisdictionally. By cooperating on fundamental pastoral ministries and programs, in actual fact, the Assembly of Bishops seeks to resolve internal clashes and establish canonical order among the various jurisdictions. In other words, since it has proved difficult, as we heard, or even impossible to achieve Orthodox unity in a top-down process, the Assembly is pursuing the same goal from the bottom up. Of course, the process is a journey, indeed a long journey. Nevertheless, the mechanisms are now in place to move beyond the inter-Orthodox contentions and divisions of the now past diaspora. Together with our leaders, the bishops of the Assembly, we are all in this movement together. We must not forget that, like all relationships, we know that we will take some steps forward and some or even many steps backwards. However, so long as we keep our focus on Christ and practice humility and patience, prayer and fasting, the Church in this country will indeed be able to overcome any differences, so that, in time, undoubtedly God's time, we may realize both canonical order, common witness, and ultimately unity of faith here in our country. And then I'll just add, since hearing all these talks, and we've gone very systematically through each of the archbishops, and Father Nicholas commented on all of this, I will say this shift in the Assembly has been an interesting thing, because after the 2016 Holy and Great Council, at that time I was in the department, but I wasn't the ecumenical officer, there was a bit of a dormancy period. And then in 2018, when I became the ecumenical officer, I told the Archbishop that whether you look at if you're being governed by Chambézy or you're being governed by the Holy and Great Council, it's the same words. They just changed like 3 or 4 words in there. It's the exact same mandate. So some are at the assembly under the mandate of Chambézy, and some are there under the mandate of the Holy and Great Council, which again is the exact same mandate, and we can search forward. And that's when we decided that we had to start focusing on pastoral programs and pastoral ministry. And when Archbishop Elpidio Foros came, he said to me, I asked him, what is your priorities? And one of his main priorities was inter-Orthodox cooperation in the assembly. And I said, the only way we're ever going to move that forward, it's never really had staff. We've had a research person, we had a communications for a bit, but you never had a coordinating person. So you need to have somebody that takes a role and coordinates the work and develops those programs. And so it's one of those kind of shoot yourself in the foot moments where I then became that person. But at any rate, I am passionate about this, so I believe in it and I want to move it forward. And so that's when we've been able in the last 2 years to be able to start creating these programs and start going back to this grassroots, to refocus on the institutions that were created, OC, EC, and the Scouts and all of that, and so on and so forth. So just to add that it's been under the leadership of the past 2 archbishops that we've been able to sort of begin to move the needle again just in these past 2-3 years.
I want to thank both Father Nick and John. We have almost 30 minutes for discussion and questions, and I would like to take my prerogative as discussion facilitator to ask one question. Just John, number one, what's the website for for the Assembly of Bishops, and then secondly, sort of more discursive. How does publicity work within across the jurisdictions? How do you market? How do you let people know within these different jurisdictions about these programs? And after that, I'll let each speaker recognize. It'll work out, but the questions can be to either of our speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Beck. So the first question is easy. It's just assemblyofbishops.org. And we relaunched it a few years ago, so it's got a lot of the resources that I was talking about. We have a parish directory, the directory of mental health professionals, and all those types of things. The second question, I think, is just sort of the nightmare across the church. Every jurisdiction has its own level of ability when it comes to communicating. So what the assembly does as far as communications, we hired just 5 or 6 months ago a part-time communications officer, and then we have somebody that we've had for the past 2 years that's been running our social media. And so we do a lot of communicating through social media, through our listserv, and now the communications officer has been devising a strategic plan. And so when it comes to sharing things, we share a lot of things from the agencies and the affiliates and the existing pan-Orthodox organizations. That's low-hanging fruit. It's very easy. And then our communications team looks through on a daily basis the communications from the various jurisdictions. And if they're applicable in the pan-Orthodox sphere especially, we'll repost and share those as well, in addition to our own communications about assembly initiatives and work and all of that. So you can find us on all of the major social media platforms. You can sign up for our listserv through the website and get all the information you need from us. And of course, the app is another avenue. Through the app, we can push messages and news in addition to surveys. And ultimately, we'll try to integrate things like our directories into the app as well. But right now, it's mainly for research and news.
Thank you very much, both of you. I just thought about this when you mentioned that one of your hats that you wear is, or the office that you lead has to do with the Orthodox and Catholic dialogue. And I'm going to look at all of my fellow presenters. I didn't hear any speaking about Patriarch Athenagoras yesterday, his approach to the Pope and the lifting of the anathemas. Yesterday we all went through lots and lots with Athenagoras, but that wasn't mentioned, and I think that's one of his highlights. And of his time. And I wondered if you could speak now. You said it's going to be reorganized, the Orthodox and Catholic dialogue, and are all the other jurisdictions on the same, are all the jurisdictions of Orthodoxy on the same page, and how are they represented on the dialogue?
So for the dialogue or any of our committees that we form or things of that nature, we try to get at least one representative from every jurisdiction. I think the Orthodox Catholic dialogue is fairly well represented. We don't have anyone from the Georgian, Bulgarian, or Antiochian diocese right now. But anything that any of the groups work on, or any of whether there's the dialogue or the reception of converts committee or whatever else, it all goes through the executive committee. And so what ends up happening is once the documents are formed, the executive committee will send it to their advisors, and the executive committee is the heads of all the jurisdictions. So it does get a review process, and before things go out on a broader scale, it usually goes to the entire assembly. So you have all 50. Metropolitan Ilia, if you guys don't know, passed away recently, and so 56 now bishops. And Metropolitan Ilia was very close to the school. He was living here on campus when I was a student, so we'll miss him. And may his memory be eternal. But it goes through the entire body of the bishops. So that's how the review process happens. When it comes to the restructuring, it's going to be the core group. So it'll be the two chairmen, Cardinal Tobin. I was going to say Dolan, but it's Tobin. Cardinal Tobin and Metropolitan Methodius. And then the two secretaries, Father Tom Fitzgerald and Father Brian Daly from the Catholic side. And then a few others, because we're also this is one of the things that we've continued with the Canadian groups as well. So we'll have a few from them. But it'll be like 5 or 6 people, and they'll work on the structure and the plan, and then they'll bring it back to the full group for discussion and things of that nature. But it's just a matter of, the work needs to continue, and the model we've been using just needs to be shifted a little bit, but it's just an organizational thing, not a matter of the dialogue itself or things of that nature as far as the content.
George?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Your talks were on the same thing, but very different, and I really appreciated both of them. Father Nicholas, I especially appreciated the history that predates me, my own life, and just knowing some of that was really, really, really fascinating. It's really just an observation. It's not a criticism at all, but kind of drawing on the dichotomies we spoke about this morning, right? In both of your presentations, we got a presentation of American Orthodoxy almost exclusively through the lens of hierarchical institutions, right? That there was almost no consideration of thinking about the possibility of unity kind of coming from below, right? I mean, I'm very enthused, Nick, by the direction that the Assembly's going to do these, to focus on on youth, the new volunteer thing, on youth, right? That's all very positive, but it just strikes me as, again, I know of examples across the country where there are lay-led initiatives that almost to the exclusion of the clergy regarding Orthodox Catholic things, right? And I'm just curious if there is any kind of lay-led Orthodox American unity initiatives taking place that might be pushing the Assembly, right? I mean, I share, I think, the same frustrations that you guys share, right? That the mother churches are going to do their thing. The bishops that we have in place are beholden to the mother churches to some extent. They never really have the autonomy to do what they might want to do or feel is best, right? And I'm just wondering if there is kind of any push from below, or are people just indifferent because they're opting out of religion anyway?
Yeah. I'm from Worcester, and Worcester has probably the earliest pan-Orthodox, lay-led, but involving the clergy from the early 1950s. It had little hiatuses along the way, but set up all kinds of efforts, pan-Orthodox. We own part of the city cemetery. We established a nursing home, 113-bed, pan-Orthodox. There's a lot of stuff that's happening unfortunately, for you've got a conference like this. It would be worth having a conference about what's going on. There are a lot of things that go on, have gone on, and continuing to go. Sometimes it's easier than others. There were a lot of, along the way, hierarchical opposition to this because they saw this as a kind of extra-canonical, outside of diocesan sort of thing. But even most of the bishops were convinced over the years that this was a very good thing. Johnstown has a group. Detroit had a very powerful group. In Texas, there were other groups as well. There was an effort in the run-up to the assembly to regularize these, so create some guidelines around this that the bishops could approve for how to do the lay participation piece. In the discussions around the canonical regional planning, the districts, one of the ideas was to begin to actively engage the parishes, local lay leaders on lots of different levels in the regions, in the well, let's call them dioceses, to cooperate in this way. One point in SCOBA, there was the idea, it's not lay necessarily, but to create a single retirement plan. My feeling at the time was, if you want to get everyone cooperating among the clergy especially, have all of their retirements tied into one another, and they'll start talking. So there are a lot of those initiatives that have existed, that continue to exist, and it waxes and it wanes, but it needs attention. And let me just underscore one of the things that Nick said here was, one of the great weaknesses of the previous iterations was that there wasn't a staff and a paid staff. And that has been sort of more or less rectified. And that's critical, because if you don't have somebody whose job it is to work on this stuff, it won't happen.
Yes, Metropolitan Gregory always reminds me that I wake up thinking of the assembly and go to sleep thinking of the assembly. I always remind him I get my coffee first, and then I think about the assembly. But just to add to that, what Father Nicholas was referring to was passed in 2018, and that's now what I refer to as the Interparish associations. In 2018, when they realized, this was 2 years after 2016, they had, finally the 2017, obviously, meeting was 2016 and 17, really dealing with stuff from the assembly. 2018, they finally said, what are we going to do to move forward? And so the Canonical Regional Planning Committee came up with that idea of having interparish associations, which is very local. So you'll take the example of Atlanta, which is our pilot right now. It's just the parishes within Atlanta, and it's a clergy and one or two lay people from that parish, and they come together to determine how to be pan-Orthodox in that city, in that very local area. And right now it's been very successful. It's been around less than a year. But we're going to try to then codify that model now and get it to pass around the country. So we got to see. We have to be able to fund it. We're going to need a project manager and all those things to make this really work. We need somebody that wakes up thinking just about the interparish associations, right? And that kind of thing. So we'll see how it goes.
Father Costin, and then Jem, you're on deck.
Thank you very much for two very inspiring talks. It's great to see that, both to hear from somebody who has worked for a long, long time and was enthusiastic and disappointed, and so on, and from a young man who is enthusiastic now. That's all wonderful. And I believe all of us here are at least try to be enthusiastic and support this. But I was struck by what Father Nick said about God granting the unity as a gift. Just like in a marriage, you can't have God uniting husband and wife before they get engaged and say yes to each other. I'm really wondering if we as community in any way have a willingness to be together, because we have been conditioned now for 100 years that we are separate. It's almost like, I am a Romanian priest serving in the Greek Archdiocese. It's almost like the Romanian priests serving in the Romanian Archdiocese do not exist. We see each other as clergy monthly, but we never see the Romanian clergy. We never very, very rarely celebrate together, let alone the lay people. So you have situations for a while in Hartford, there was a Romanian priest at a Greek church, and there was a Romanian congregation at the same church, but they had to go have their liturgy on Saturday. They couldn't even be together. So, I mean, are we ready to be together? And I don't want to just blame the people. I would say we would be ready to be together if people would feel that they're equally loved by all the hierarchs, that it doesn't matter who you serve canonically, but maybe they would be allowed to visit each other's parishes. I mean, I don't think we have taken the first step, and then we try at the top to develop structures, which is wonderful, but I don't know if our people, 90% of them are even ready. They each one have their own little church, and I don't think they're ready to have, let's say, in a geographic area, to say combine 2 parishes from 2 jurisdictions. I don't know if they would be willing to do that.
I'll comment on that, and I'll be a little bit blunt because I see it from the other side, and we can see, like from the bishop's side. There's a lot of complaint, like we get the crux of, well, we are not doing this because of our bishops and they don't have given us permission and they haven't given us this or that. And so the idea of the interparish associations and these types of things is that the bishops are agreeing that it's okay and they're authorizing the priests. But I don't always see the priests taking the initiative and taking the daring move and guiding the people who may not be ready today to that next step. Right, and that's really the job of the clergy on the ground in these local areas. It has to be, and that's why the parish, the Atlanta one, even in the beginning of the Atlanta, we got some of my bishop said this, my bishop said that. Well, I picked up my phone and I called their bishop and I said, can you call your parish and tell them, because they're using you right now to not participate in this. And so the bishops call and they say, you have to go do this. and it happens, but that's why going top down, we have this, we can eliminate this middle ground of who's blaming who for what. We don't need blaming from the bottom up, and we don't need blaming from the top down. So I'm sorry to be blunt, but I see it from both sides, and we're trying to eliminate that and eliminate the crutches to make sure it's happening. But it really is the leadership of the clergy that will make this successful, not the bishops. The bishops have to give their permission and blessing, but if the clergy want it, it will happen.
I think there are 3 parts to this. I agree with everything he said. We have not fundamentally decided what the organizational principle of the church will be here in America. Will it be Jesus Christ and the proclamation of the gospel, or will it be the preservation of various ethnic identities? That doesn't mean they're exclusive. I mean, God forbid the preaching of the gospel. But what's priority in all of this? And how do we do that? The second part is they need a task. And that's especially where the laity would come in. There need to be specific tasks in which they're cooperating, they're doing stuff together and whatever else. And that will build a kind of camaraderie. And then they actively, and here, it isn't enough to be invited to come to the clergy meeting. I would get all, Metropolitan Methodius and the staff, they were very meticulous about inviting people, inviting other clergy. But you really need somebody to pull you, too. And that needs to be a little bit more active. In terms of parishes coming together, I come from Southbridge. That's my village. And I use the word deliberately because it's like a village. At least it used to be. There were 3 churches. And they all came pretty much from the same part of the Balkans. There's a Greek church, an Albanian church, and a Romanian church. They couldn't sustain a priest. No one of the parishes could sustain a salary. The factories left, whatever else, but there were 3 churches there, 3 facilities. I said, you know what would be a good idea? See if I could get them, because I'm a native son, I know everybody, see if I could get them to cooperate to fund the salary of 1 priest. Since I sit on all these meetings, I said I also know all the bishops. And I can twist arms to get them to agree to a kind of cross-jurisdictional, if you will, appointment. The Greeks were totally uninterested. I mean, it's a particular kind of mentality in the parish. You weren't getting any cooperation out of them. The Albanians and the Romanians, a lot of them were like first cousins. So I went to both churches and cajoled them or whatever else. I got them to more or less agree. I got the bishops to agree to and the idea was, you want creativity here. You weren't going to get anybody to give up their church. So what you did was you would celebrate one Sunday in one church, the other Sunday in the other church, and go back and forth. And my feeling was that in about 5 years, people would say, this is really stupid. And they would begin to consolidate in some way and really form a community. And we were pretty far down that path. And then at one meeting, somebody said something not so nice about the other ethnic group. Done. Done. And so it's really hard work. It takes a lot of effort. I had a unique situation in my position there to kind of nudge it along. But, you know, the devil works.
Jim?
So this is a follow-up on what George asked earlier about sort of this concept of bubbling up. Haven't heard, and I'd like both of your perspectives, one a bit more historical and one a bit more contemporary. What has been the impact, if any, of OCL on the Assembly of Bishops, and how is OCL perceived by the Assembly of Bishops?
So OCL, I'm actually, I meet with them regularly. So the past couple months, I don't know if because it was summer, I don't know if they've not done them or they haven't invited me, but I think it's just because they haven't really had them. But I have a very good relationship with OCL at this point. The last 2 or 3 of their they call them Mastermind series or whatever. It's once a month that they invite all the OCL on there. We've been doing the assembly. I did the first one was an overview. The second one we talked about institutional chaplaincy, and the third one we talked about the interparish associations. So the way I see it is we can engage them and they can engage us to have good collaboration, and therefore they will be able to impact us in the sense of masterminding things and helping us get through it. And they gave us an idea of a report card and that kind of thing, so it'll be internal, but to the bishops in January, they'll see a report card on where they are on their strategic plan of 2020 and this type of thing, so they've helped us develop that. So I'd say, at least as in very contemporary terms, it's been good. They have this recent statement that went out, and I saw it beforehand, and I worked with them and whatever else, and that's fine. I mean, of course, I told them the bishops themselves, most of them will not be able to sign this type of thing, but you're free to do what you want. You know, you can't control people. You can't tell them what to do. I think the only thing with OCL, and I've talked to them about this a lot, is that, and this isn't just OCL, it's others, is this idea of just being very caught up in the idea of institutional unity and autocephaly and all of that. And because of that, shutting down to any other forms of unity, right? Like what we're doing is unity. We've never had mental health programs, strong mental health programs across any jurisdiction. So now we're doing it together rather than doing it separate or under one jurisdiction or another. We've never, anywhere in the world, had a volunteer corps, right? So what I told the bishops in the executive committee in 2019 when the new archbishop came in is, anything that's new, we should not be doing under a particular jurisdiction. Let's just start doing it together, and that will be the manifestation of unity. OCL doesn't see it that way. Unless there is administrative unity, there is no unity. So that's where we have some tension, and we'll work through that. That's, good stuff comes out of tension and conflict. So,
I'll just a little bit of I think corrective here. I think they're too caught up in power politics, in lobbying, and they think that if you do it, it's like the Congress. If you kind of get push and do whatever else. I think I've dialogued with various people along the way. I think they're very naive in terms of ecclesiology, how the church operates. I mean, the church, 2 millennia. What is really, how it really kind of organizes. That unity can also exist on lots of different levels. There's a tendency to create, because if you're dealing with power politics, then it's, what I hear a lot is it's all in the ecumenical patriarch. that he's the blockage here, and that if you can just do this, of course. I was on a panel, one of these OCL panels, on this very question. And also was the bishop of the other Romanian diocese, in which I spent tens of thousands of dollars in 20 years, helping to negotiate a healing of the rift in the Romanian church, dating from the 1940, whatever else. Back and forth, we've come to an agreement like 3 or 4 times, whatever else, and it was nixed by him. To which I said, because I'm so shy, I said, I don't want to hear what the ecumenical patriarch is doing. I know that we, sitting here right now, you and me, well, but whatever, you and me, could fix the Romanian problem right now. Let's do it. What's stopping us? One language, one people. Our bylaws, because they were written at the same time, are pretty much the same. We celebrate, even hold our congresses at the same time the last 50-odd years. What's separating us? So there's that piece to it. So I don't know. I appreciate the involvement. I appreciate the enthusiasm. I would appreciate a little bit more really trying to understand the nature of the church and really looking at how to build it, because this will happen only from the bottom up. It will not happen top down. That is not how it's going to happen, because anything top down, you immediately spawns resistance one way or another. It has to come up, and it has to be, I won't say sort of whatever of the people, but of course of the people. You know, the church is the people. Remember, the clergy are only like 1.11 whatever % of the church. 99.9999% are the people. I don't understand why everybody doesn't look at that and say, you know, what are we doing? Where are the people? You know, you can't have a liturgy without the people.
I just want to add, because a lot of times we look at the patriarchates as the big bad patriarchates that are blocking all this and blocking us from moving things forward, and it's definitely not the case. And it lends to our maturity, and so that's where the bottom up happens. As we start doing the things together, they'll see us as mature enough to grant that autocephaly. But I just wanted to make the clarification. It won't happen from the bottom up with a declaration of independence. That's just not how ecclesiology works, and that's where there's a confusion. But if we start doing the things together, we will be mature enough to receive that autocephaly from the mother churches together at some point.
It is, however, historically where separation of national churches come from.
Yes, I mean national churches,
okay,
yes.
We're not doing this anymore. We're separate, and then the Bulgarians and the patriarch won't get along for 50 years and find
There is that. The Romanians didn't happen that way, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's not exclusively so, but when the Russians declared autocephaly, they didn't ask for permission from.
And you think we're not mature enough as a church?
Who, him or me?
Nick said we're not mature.
Yeah.
That's right.
I said it.
And the other Nick didn't show. It was going to be really, it would have been.
So, in order to
Just like my big fat Greek wedding.
in order to do things together, we're actually unfortunately out of time. But if you want to ask
See, the tyrant is imposing.
No, I am. No, I'm coming up from the bottom up. I'm not from any of these jurisdictions. I belong to this group. Let us thank our speakers. And Jim, is lunch in the cafeteria?
Yes.
So we'll go to the cafeteria.
Can I